G'day and welcome back to my channel. Now, one of the things that a lot of people who are new to making wood ships, planking, it's difficult, okay? And especially when it comes to tapering. They start off at the plank width that's supplied in the middle, but as they go to the stern, they get a lot thinner. And, the same thing happens at the bow. The planks thin out. There's not as much space. How do you work that out? Now, there are many complicated ways to do it, but I think I've hit on a very simple and organic way to do it that anyone, even if you're not very good at maths, this is so easy. And you'll be able to work out your plank tapering and get all your planks to fit together, and it'll look just as nice as this. Want to know about that? All right, hang in there. Roll the music. Now, one of the questions I get asked a lot is about tapering. Like, how do you work out how thin are your planks going to need to be? How do you get them to all fit perfectly and thin all the way down? And it looks like it's something that's really complicated. And I've tried to explain it using tables and spreadsheets, things like that, which, a lot of you are not mathematically orientated. I know that. And I see your eyes roll, virtually across the screen. And I've seen this all my life. I mean, I understand mathematics, very analytical, mathematical mind, but not everyone's like that. So I have tried hard to work out an organic technique to do this. And this is the best that I could come up with. And actually, it kind of makes it easier. So not only have I sort of not dumbed it down, but tried to make it less complicated. Now, if you haven't watched the previous videos, then I'll explain now. I have already planked the first layer here. This side though, I've done both layers. Now I've done that for the video. You normally don't do it this way. You would do basically a plank or two this side, a plank or two that side, slowly build up your first layer, slowly build up your first layer, and then do your second layer. But because of my needs to create videos, I have done it that unusual way. So if that confuses you for a start, I'm just doing it this strange way to illustrate things. But assuming we are doing things evenly, let's do that. Now, my first layer I have done. And to do that, I needed to divide the hull into 3 sections because the 3 sections get operated on and get tapered differently. They are consistent that all the tapers are pretty well the same in section 1, in section 2, and in section 3. So once you know that, it's not really that big a deal. You've just got, A, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, if you like. Now I start with the top section here. Okay, so I'll turn the hull this way so I'm not working upside down. All right, the top part of the hull, which is relatively straight up and down. And these planks usually can go on with no tapering at all. In the case of this kit, the Bounty, yes, that was possible. There's no tapering at all. That is the 6mm plank from there all the way to the bow. Okay? And then the only reason I haven't put planks here is I've used this method where we basically keep the tapering to an absolute minimum for the first layer to make our first layer a lot easier, and we fill the ends with balsa, as I've explained in previous videos. Now, section 1, section 2 and section 3 just happen to be all the same number of planks for this Bounty kit. It's not always that way, not always, but generally speaking, your hull is relatively flat, the side of the hull, right above the waterline, and then at the waterline it starts to turn, right, the turn of the hull, and the turn of the hull goes all the way to the keel. Now the midpoint of the turn of the hull is this line that I've drawn here. So these define the zones. The waterline, so to speak, or the whale line, the middle of the turn, and the keel. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and your deck defines this one. Usually that's your deck before you put any forecastle or stern superstructure on. This is always worked out from the level of the deck. So from deck to waterline, from waterline to middle of the turn, from middle of the turn to keel. Those are your 3 areas. Some ships, depending on the shape they are, they might have more of a flat bottom, or they may be more sharper there. They may have not much basically freeboard here. This might be very short on them, you know, or they might be very tall. That all changes. It just so happens in the Bounty, for the kind of ship that it is, there's 8 planks there, 8 planks there, and 8 planks there when there's 6mm, right? Which is what was supplied in the kit. So basically it becomes a very easy way to illustrate these sections. So my first 8 planks go on, and they are not tapered. So those first 2mm thick, 8 plank wide strips, on they go, and they become basically my strakes. Okay, an entire run like that is a strake. A plank is just like from there to there. That's a plank. Planks together is called a strake. So there you go. So when you have a lot of them, they're all straight together. Okay, or a run. I'll often call it a run. A run's a nice word. Anyhow, so these runs or strakes are actually single planks, and we do that in modelling because it's easier. It's easier to do one big long, you know, strake, and then you can divide it up and mark it as single planks later. Now my first layer too, for those who haven't seen the other videos, yeah, I've got toothpicks in there which are spiked in this big long plank to hold it in place. But that doesn't matter because it's all going to get covered up. Okay. When the second layer goes on, all of that disappears because the second layer usually doesn't need pinning. The planks of the second layer are very thin, so they can just be basically wet and bent and twisted. So it's not a problem. In my case, I have brown ones and I have white ones. That's only because I wanted that kind of coloration for my model. Okay, because the ships of this period, before they were copper plated, had white lower hulls, and then the upper part was darker colours, usually blues and, you know, greens and whatever colour they wanted to paint things. I wanted to really keep the wood texture, so I've gone with this kind of using natural colours of wood, the very light whitey yellow colour, and then the darker reddy brown colour to give my ship a natural demarcation there at the waterline. There will be a plank that goes across here on the outside, which is my whale. In fact, I think it's about 2 planks. And so that tends to, if you make a little bit of gaff when you join, if it's too thin in one spot, too thick in the other, don't worry, because your whale is going to go across there, pretty well cover most of the sins of the join if your join wasn't perfect. But anyhow, okay, so our first 8 planks, easy. We'll just put those on basically. They will not require tapering. Glue them on. We will have a bit of trouble bending them into shape here, so they need to be nice and wet, and in my case I use the electric planking tool, which is a big fat soldering iron with a knob on it, and with that I will convince these planks to bend and twist into shape. And I showed all that in previous videos, and I will be showing more as we go ahead. Working out your tapers. Well, section A, don't have to worry about that, done. Sections B and C, okay. First you need to know where is this midpoint, and it's pretty easy to work out because you've only got to measure from where you finished up here with section A down to your keel. And in my case, that is basically 96, 97 millimeters. That is terrific because it's 16 6mm wide planks. Okay, 2 lots of 8. So that's great. So we then can measure half that distance. So 48, right, we've only got, it's only simple math, 48, halfway and halfway. 48, 48, we can get a midpoint. Now it just so happens this frame here, this bulkhead that all these planks are on, and this bulkhead, they're the widest ones in the kit. And that's kind of, you get that around the middle of your ship, you'll have 2 or maybe 3 bulkheads, and they form the widest, thickest part of the ship, and they should be consistent. So these ones here all measure and give me that 40, 47, 48, 48, 48. Basically, it allows me to have 8 planks, and no taper required at all. So for that section there, there's no tapering. But as we go this way, they're going to get thinner. Now, how much thinner they get? Well, this is how you work it out. Once you know where the bulkheads are that for not tapering, and hopefully you've got at least 2, right? So we'll just say you've got those 2. You can then draw a line, as I've done, measure, draw your line, at this point we put a plank. You can use the 2mm ones. It's probably better because then they won't twist and warp as much. But for what I'm trying to illustrate, I'll just use this very thin 1/2mm plank. So holding it there in place, you could pin it if you like. You can put holes in this layer because you're going to cover it up. But let's just say that I've got it there. I could even sticky tape it in place, whatever. Just make sure I hold it and it doesn't move. Now I let this plank run to its natural course. And if you have a look, that's the line that I drew, okay? And the same on this side, making sure that it's lined up there. And then I let it run its natural course. And then there's that line. And you just pencil that in. So with your bent plank in place, well, it's not actually, it's not bent up or down, it's just allowed to flow, okay? So it just rests on the hull. You would just basically run along there and mark it. Okay, now you've got your demarcation point. That is the natural curve of the hull between B and C regions. That means that when you lay a plank here, it will not need to distort and twist too much. See, up here, you do have distortion. That is not level, okay? That is upswept. So that poor old plank there needed to be bent and wet and twisted and to get its shape. It's fairly level here, but then it kind of sweeps up at the stern. So that plank did require a bit of twisting. Even though it didn't require tapering, it had to be twisted up to get the shape. But our middle plank here is going to require nothing other than to wet it and put it on. And it will just sit there perfectly. It'll be so easy. We just glue it. In fact, we wouldn't even need to really wet it much. Probably just give it a bit of dampness at the top and the bottom, you know, the bow and the stern. It'll sit perfectly. So that is an unstrained plank. That's what we want. So that line is very important, and it's good to draw it on at this stage. And that's handy doing 2 layers of planking because we can do this calculation. So we really haven't done much math at the moment other than to measure and then just divide in half, which is fairly simple. Now, when I measure here, my lower hull measures to 45mm and my upper hull measures to 48mm. So here I might want to go to 5.5mm planks, or, you know, still close to 6, but still I might decide 5.5mm. It's an easy calculation. You've got 45 divided by 8. When I measure here though, I've got 40 and 43. So at this point, these planks here, I've got 8 planks to fit into 40. So 5/8 of 40. So I know I'll need 5mm planks. And over here, I've got 43. I think, or 42. So then I know, oh, they'll have to probably be, again, 5 and a bit. So I can probably average that because really, unless you're absolutely brilliant at cutting planks, that's a 5 and a 5. All right? Just the same as that was 6 and 6. It's close enough. And then I get down to here and I've done the measurements there to work out what I need, and I've got 4 and a 4. So straight away, these planks are going to be 4mm wide there, 5mm wide there, and 6mm wide there. That's all looking pretty good, pretty easy actually. And then 6 and 6 and 6, okay. And then I get to here and I've measured this, and here I've got 44 and 46. They're going to be 5.5, okay. So 5.5 eighths is 44. Just got to know your 8 times table because we're working in eighths all the time. We've got 8 planks running through here. So we've just always got to divide by 8. So 40 divided by 8 is 5. It's pretty easy. 44 divided by 8, well, you'll get your 40, which is 5, but then you've only got 4 left, which is half of an 8. 5.5. Use a calculator if you really can't do it. When I get to here, I've got 43 and 41. So I've measured that as 5 for this section, but 5.5 for that section. And then when I get to here, I'm still at 5.5 for my lower section, but my upper section has got down basically to 36. So at that point, that's 4.5. I can't do the 5 anymore. And then when I get down to here, it's 30. So I can only do 4. 4 8's 32, okay? So there'll be 4mm planks from then on. Now don't worry too much because the difference of a millimetre, you can shave off one plank when you go to put the final plank in. Okay, so as long as your measurement allows for a little bit extra, you should be fine. And there's always a little bit of drift, a little bit of movement, and you will get the odd tiny little gap. But we're trying to get as close as we can. And anyhow, being wood, you can kind of push it together, and you can do some tricks with the wood. It's not like plastic or metal where it's a fixed size. It's very malleable. It will stretch out. You can iron on with that electric plank bender and fatten the planks out by crushing the cellulose in the timber so that it actually spreads out and fills a tiny gap. Or you can basically push two against each other. You'll end up with a little raised area, but that can easily be sanded off. So it's a natural product. You can do tricks with it. Doing it this way, I've written on my model. I didn't have to make up a big spreadsheet or do anything complicated. I'm actually doing it as I'm working my way through. So I'm measuring, I'm dividing by 8, and away I go. And I have this line to work towards. So when I'm planking down, I'm looking at this line. So if for some reason I start to get a massive drift and I end up, my planks are starting to look like this, I'll go, well, something's wrong. I would need to double check my measurements, maybe pull a few planks up because I've made a big mistake. But hopefully as I go down, my planks will all be level and they'll end up there. And this section of planks, when I run from there all the way to the waterline, they should be level. Okay? Now, it's best to make up a former plank for any section. So I've already made up a former here, which will work for this middle section. And all I did was, I'll turn it upside down to show you what I've done. I've basically got a plank, imagine it hasn't been cut, and I've just pinned it on here. Okay, so I think I've got some holes. So I've pinned this plank on here. So that's where it starts, and then it's going to run all the way to the end here. And not all planks are going to be the same length, so that's another consideration. Like this plank here is going to be shorter than those planks down there, which are going to be longer. Okay. All right, so that's where it is. And then all I would do is I've already done my measurements, so I can just copy them onto there. So that's 5, that's 6, that's 6, that's 6, 6, 5.5. Okay, and I'm doing it with I've made all my measurements on the frame, so it's an easy thing to find to get a reference. 5. Okay, what did I say there? 4.5. And then this one's 4. This last one's 4. There are my measurements, and then I'd simply go to my cutting board, measure them off, and trim them. Now, a word of warning here. You're always going to trim the top part of the plank. Now in this case we're working upside down, so let's turn this around. So this plank, and I've already cut it. Okay, so it is flat along the bottom. Not that you can tell because everything's twisted here, but if we put it on something level, it is flat on the bottom, but when I turn it over, it sits up for the top. So it's a good thing to know which way's up and which way's down. So it's often good to mark that. So now I know that's up, okay? Because you don't want to put your planks upside down. Now the reason is, if you put a plank on a ship and you just let it follow its natural curve, it always goes up. So if you're cutting stuff off the bottom, you've increased that twist up, and it's going to be a bugger if you want to push it down and try and flatten it. If you take your waste off from the top of the plank, it's going to be a lot easier. You've got much less wood to push down if you're trying to force planks to a certain shape. So when you're tapering, you always taper the top. So we've only had to cut 1, 2, 3 frames there, and then on this side 1, 2, 3, 4. So really you've only got to cut the little strip off there and cut a little strip off there. You could do them all individually just using your rule and your hobby knife, or you can use the other method that I like to, which is mount up a whole lot of planks together. You can usually, well with these very thin ones, you could do all 8. You can do 8 in one hit. Basically put them all together, put them in a vise, and then you use the former one that you've already done as a template and you plane down to them. and then you'll have 8 planks all identical. But there are various ways to doing it. You only got 8 to do. You could easily do them by hand and just cut each one using your rule. And the lines are fairly straight. They're not too bad. You could sand them to smooth out that curve, because a lot of people go, oh, it's not going to be a perfect curve. The thing is, though, wood, again, compresses and expands. So you can put them in there and push hard against the next plank. This is only 0.5 millimetre thick. So pushing up to the next plank and pushing down and basically forcing them together, you will only raise a little bit of wood which you're going to sand off, or you'll flatten out the plank a bit and it'll squeeze across and they'll compress. So don't worry too much about that. As long as it's a nice clean cut, you should be fine. So once you've got all those planks, you should be fine. You should be fine to just basically work from that line all the way up. Now, the other thing which I have discussed in the other videos is, I'll do this section first, call that A if you like, but I won't do B section next. I'll jump to C and work from the keel. And you always do that. You work from the deck down to basically the whale line or the water line, and you start at the keel and you work up to the turn of the hull there. And then that leaves your middle section. Now what you do then is, once you've done those two and you're back to your middle, you remeasure, because there could have been drift. There could have been problems. What happened here when I was doing this, I was having such a devil of a job in the first layer doing my wedges and everything, because I didn't like this wood. It was splintering and it wasn't bending the way I wanted to, and it was this was birch wood and I really wouldn't recommend it. It's a bugger for doing planking. And when I got to my middle point, I was way off from my line. And the thing is, I could see my line. I'd marked it on the frames. So I knew I was really going to have to do a rethink doing my planking here. So my planking in the middle here is not as neat for that first layer. But it taught me I don't want to use this kind of wood again, and it also taught me to double check my measurements. And that's why I started working out this technique. If you mark it all up on the model, it's there in front of you, and your only measurements are right there. You're measuring on the model. You can write down that number straight away. Lost my pencil. Write down that number as you do it, so you're not getting lost and you know that number refers to there. And then you've only got to divide by the number of planks in the section. In the Bounty, each section is 8 planks. Easy as that. I hope that has made it less stressful and less scary in trying to work out planks, as I have tried to explain this a number of times in videos, and some people get it, some people don't. But if you can draw it on the model and see it there in front of you, maybe that's easier. And the only math you've got to do is divide by your plank number. So if you're building the Bounty kit, you've only got to remember to divide by 8. Easy as that. Well, you'll divide by 2 to get those halves. But everything's in 8s. So it's 8, 8, 8. Very simple. Fairly easy to work out your tapering. Okay. Well, that's it. Next time we'll actually physically do all this and you can see it all in operation. And we'll see if all my numbers add up. They should. They should. I managed to do it on this side. I did a nice job planking there. And my skills have got better and better the more I've got back into this after being away from wood ships for quite a lot of years. All right, that's enough waffle today. If you like this video, please, comment, subscribe, like, hit that bell notification. If you'd like to support me so I can do more of these videos, have a look at my Patreon channel, where from $1 a month you can get these videos early and advert free. How good's that? All right, that's it. Goodbye from Australia, and it's hooroo from Harry Houdini.